And welcome back. So, hopefully, you watched the weather anchor who was explaining a little bit about how weather systems work and fronts and high and low pressure. So, we can kind of get a feel for when we look at a weather map, what do all of these squiggly lines mean? If you haven't watched it yet, then I want you to go ahead and pause this video and I want you to watch this graphic here or watch this video that's going to be up on Canvas. And he's going to do a better job explaining kind of what is a weather map and how to read it than I can. So go ahead and pause it, and I'll see you when you get back. So that was some pretty cool stuff. The way he kind of talked about how the weather affects us, how we have high pressure and low pressure, and how all of that's moving through. And so when we look at a weather map, a couple things that I want you to pay attention to are in the lines. We've got these blue lines going on right here. Yep, there's my mouse. Sorry. We've got these blue lines right here, and these blue lines are called a cold front. And remember the little cold icicles hanging down? So when I look at the service map, I can see there's a cold front right here. It looks like there's also another little cold front down into the right. The second weather pattern he talked about was the warm front, the little warm suns. So when I look at this map, I can see there's a warm front down here in this area, and it looks like that's probably where most of it is right now. The next weather system, the third one, was a stationary front, and that's where the warm and cold are kind of both in the lines. So I can see going through the middle of the United States a stationary front here. There's off in the eastern part of the state, there's another stationary front that's moving away as well. Up next, we've got the purple, which has the triangles and the circles on the same line. It's not red, it's not blue, it's purple. This is your occluded front. And so I see there's a little bit of an occluded front right there. There's a second down in Mississippi. And we are right here in southeast Alabama. So this weather is going to be what's affecting us. And then there's going to be a surface trough, which are these lines that are kind of moving throughout the United States. So I'm going to go over those in a little bit more detail. So with the cold front, like he said, the cold front is located on the leading edge of a temperature drop off. So where we go from hot down to cold. And you can kind of see the arrows of the cold front kind of show you which way it's pointing. And so when you have cold fronts, you're going to tend to have rain, which is precipitation. You could have heavy thunderstorms, light thunderstorms, hail, things like that. Cold fronts are going to produce a sharper change in weather. So it's going to quickly go from hot to cold. If you notice when we had like the really bad weather a couple weeks ago, the temperatures went from the 70s and then like they dropped really fast, and now we're bringing our cold blankets back because things like the cold front came in. Cold fronts are also usually associated with a low pressure system. So I can see this low pressure is moving with this cold front. Likewise up here, I've got this low pressure system that's kind of associated with that cold front and moving that along. Up next, we got the warm front. Remember the warm with like little yellow little sunshines? So I've got them in Florida, and they're just kind of moving up. Warm fronts are slower than cold fronts. So cold fronts are going to move a lot fast. Warm fronts a little bit slower. And sometimes the cold front can overtake the warm front. But when you're dealing with warm fronts, it usually means clearing and warming skies, and it tends to denote nice weather. So moving on to a stationary front, that's where a cold and a warm front have kind of gotten together, and instead of moving, they're just going to kind of stay in one particular area. They're not going to move around a whole lot. Stationary fronts that you can kind of see up here and up here can be found usually, with a stationary front. Stationary, it's not moving. So whatever weather is associated with them is going to stay around for a while. Up next, we've got that occluded front. That was the purple with the circles and the triangles. And we've got a couple of them in play. And an occluded front is when a cold front takes over a warm front. Because remember how I said the cold front moves really fast and that warm front moves really slow? So as that warm front's moving, that cold front's going to overtake it. And then their temperatures are going to mix, and you're going to get an occluded front. This usually means that you have drier air, so there's not going to be as much precipitation around it. As with cold fronts and warm fronts. The next thing we have is a trough, and this is basically more associated with high pressure and low pressure. And a trough is just sort of like a tidal wave of air, whereas the high pressure would be like a cyclone that would be moving. The trough is just a long line of air that's just sort of moving across the country. And so these are extended from low pressure. So you can kind of see this trough is a low pressure area. This trough is a low pressure. And this trough down here is kind of being fed by that as well. So troughs are usually associated with cloudy conditions. There may be some rain. There's usually going to be colder temperatures that are going to come into play with a trough. The next thing that he talked about was pressure. You've got low pressure, and when low pressure is around, it's basically where you have all this moisture and it goes up, forms the clouds that you can see. And because that pressure is pushing it up, the clouds are going to turn into rain. So I can see when I look at this map, I've got low pressure and there's some rain. And I see these little green dots. That tends to mean that there's rain as well. So low pressure is going to tend to bring significant weather, and usually that comes in the form of moisture, so like rain and cloudiness and things like that. So the opposite of that was high pressure. Whenever you see an H, and that's moving across the map, the high pressure tends to denote that you are going to have good air, that you're going to have nice weather because of the high pressure. All the moisture just kind of drops and goes out. There's no way for it to form clouds. So high pressure is going to tend to denote clear skies ahead. Now, when you're talking about weather, the one thing that you want to note the most is that when people are interested in weather, they want to know what's going on in their area and what's going to affect them. And that's where, when we talk about weather, we're going to talk about kind of what's going to happen right here in southeast Alabama, because this is where we're located. Weather that's happening in New Mexico and Texas and Mississippi, they're going to move and they're going to come in and they're going to eventually come over to Alabama. Things in California, Nevada, they'll probably come our way, but they'll change a good bit before they get to us. So a lot of times we'll look at Texas and Louisiana and see what's going on with weather. And so that's just a quick look of how weather kind of affects us and how we look at weather in whenever we're looking at weather maps. So in a moment, or in the next video, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the types of weather maps that meteorologists use when they're sending information out and when they're trying to relay information to weather. So I'll see you in the next video.